Alright, so in this video we're going to create this script that will allow us to increase the player's score when they successfully hit the target with the orange ball. There's going to be a script that we add onto the target itself, but there's also a couple of methods we need to create in some of our existing scripts. The first one will be taking a look at the player data script. So that's the script that kind of controls the display of the score on each individual avatar. So let's go ahead and actually keeps the track of the score value for each avatar. Let's go take a look at that script. In one of our previous videos, we created a public method called getScore, which we used to retrieve the score for each player and have that display in the scoreboard. We're going to create another method just below that, also public, because it's going to be accessible outside of this script. And we'll call this Setscore. Now we are going to pass a parameter to this method here, and the parameter that we'll be passing will be the value that we want to increase the score by. So it will be an integer, and we'll just call it temp score. It doesn't really matter what we call it in this case. And what we're going to be doing is, when this method is called, we want to increase the value of model.playerscore with whatever value we pass into the method. So we're going to go ahead and go underscore model.playerscore equals underscore model.playerscore plus temp score. And the reason we're not just incrementing it by one or going underscore model.playerscore plus plus is that we want to be able to control how much this value goes up by. So if we take a look at in the game here, we've got a couple of these targets that we're going to want to be able to have them be worth different points. So this target that's up here will be worth more points because it's higher. It's harder to get to. So we want this target maybe to be worth 3 points. So we want to be able to pass that value into our script. So this is the first script that we need to revise. We've got this method here that we've created. The next script that we're going to take a look at is actually in the scoreboard that we worked on in a previous video. So here we've got this method that we created that will update the scoreboard text, but we're going to create another method in here. Alright, so the method we're going to create will be a public method because it's going to be accessible from the target itself. So we'll go public, and we'll call this method Setscore for player, and we will pass a couple of parameters to this. The first one will be client ID, which is an integer. This will be the client ID or the avatar ID of each player. So the player that hits the target, that client ID or avatar ID will get passed to this method, and that will allow us to target the correct avatar to increase the score for the correct player. And then the second value what we'll be passing is another integer, and it will be score. So we're going to cut a couple lines here. So we're going to go ahead and again tap into our avatar's dictionary. Oops. And again, just like I mentioned in the previous video, we can access a particular key or index of that dictionary through a numeric value, starting with 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. So the value that we're going to target will be client ID, and this value here from this method will be populated from the ball that the player will be holding. So basically what will happen is a player holds the ball. We talked about this in the previous video. They own that ball, so their client ID is listed as the owner. When they throw the ball, I talked about in the previous video that the ball still retains ownership, or the person retains ownership of that ball till it stops moving. So when it hits the target, they still own that ball, and then we will pass, when we call this method, we will pass that ownership ID into this method. And that will allow us to, as we go through the avatar dictionary and pull out the correct avatar that matches that ownership ID. So then we're going to go ahead after this and go .gameObject, and we're basically drilling down to the player data script and be able to access that Setscore method. So we'll go .gameObject.get component in children. We've used this method before. And we're looking for this particular component, player data script. And then we're looking for the method Setscore. And we'll be passing in this value that we pass into this method. And then because we want the scoreboard to get updated as soon as the score is increased, we need to call this set scoreboard text method here. And I'm just going to put a couple of comments in here. And then I'll just put a comment down here as well. All right. So these are the two methods that we needed to add to our existing scripts. So just to recap, we updated our player data script and created a new public method called Setscore. We're using this to actually set the update the player score that's stored in the Normcore data store for each player. This method will get called, from this Setscore player method. And then this method will be what is actually called when the orange ball hits the target in the new script that we're going to create right now. Let's go ahead and make sure we've saved that. And let's go back into Unity. And I've set these targets up as a prefab, as you can see. And I've got these numbers in here. Part of the script that we're going to create, again, this isn't something you might need to do for your assignment, but I wanted to create a prefab that could be repurposed. So I could have a target that was with 1 point or 5 points or 3 points. And so part of the script that we'll look at doing today will allowing us to update this text value to match the points that are associated with the target. So let's go ahead and create a new script. Let's go ahead and on this particular prefab, we'll go add component. And let's just call this script goal check or whatever you would like to call that. All right, there's not too much that we need in this script. We will create a couple of public and private variables. Let's go ahead and take a look at the script now and add to it here. All right, we're going to go ahead and add in a library to our UI just so that we can update the target number that's attached to each target here. And again, like I said, you may not need this for your prototype, but walking through to create this example, we'll go through and set this up here. All right, we're going to create a couple of variables that we're going to have, public and some private. So the first one we're going to create will be a public variable of type game object, and this will just be scoreboard container. And then we're going to create a private variable. Basically what we want to do is we want to be able to create a reference. I'm going to take a look inside Unity for a sec. We want to be able to create a reference to this script on the scoreboard. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and create a private variable of type scoreboard, scoreboard script, sorry. And we'll call this underscore scoreboard. And create a couple other variables here. One of an integer, we'll call this owner ID. We're going to set this to -1 by default. Again, in Normcore, -1 means that there's no owner. So we'll set this to -1 for now. And we're also going to create a couple other variables here. A public variable of type integer, and we'll call this score. Another public variable of type text, and we'll call this score text. All right, inside the start menu, or start method, sorry, we're going to add a couple of lines here. One is that we want to basically update this score text, which is basically the text that's on this prefab. We want to update that to whatever the score currently is, or for that we want this value to be for this particular target. So go ahead and create this. I'm going to say score text equals score to string. So basically, if we go ahead and hit save on this, and go back into Unity, and we'll take a look at this prefab here where we drop that script. So here we've got this publicly exposed value set to 0. If we go ahead and change this, let's say to 5, and we drag the value, the text object onto, oops, hold on here, text object onto this field here. If we go ahead and hit play, this goal should now say 5 for the target here. There it is. All right. All right, let's go back into Visual Studio. Next line that we're going to throw in is we're going to create the reference to our scoreboard script. So we'll go scoreboard equals scoreboard container dot get component scoreboard script. All right, let's go ahead and save. We don't need this update method, so we'll go ahead and delete that. We will create, though, another method here. This will be the on collision enter. So when there's a collision with the target, we want this to fire. So go ahead. And we're going to go, and we only want this to fire if it's the ball. So if we throw the paddle at it, or our avatar runs into it, or anything like that, we don't want this to work. So we're going to go ahead and add an if statement. If collision dot game objects dot tag. We could do name, whatever. In this case, I'm just going to do dot tag equals ball. And so we're going to add in a couple of lines here. So we want to set the owner ID. Remember, we have this variable up here. We want to set this to whoever owns the ball currently. Okay, so we're going to go owner ID equals collision, because well, this will allow us to basically reach down and target towards the ball. Get component. And remember, on the ball there is a real-time throwable component. And just to recap, before we go on, if we take a look at the real-time throwable script that we wrote earlier, there is this ownership variable that's being set to the transform ownership. So whoever owns it, when they pick it up, we're setting that ownership ID to this variable called ownership. Inside the goal check script that we just started working on, we are basically setting this owner ID to that value. So if player 0 picks it up, hits the target, it's going to set this owner ID value to 0. Let's go ahead and we're going to call that method we created earlier in the scoreboard script, this set score for player. We're going to go ahead and call that now. Set score for player. Remember, it's requiring a couple parameters, and if we do our round bracket, it is giving us some IntelliSense as to what it's looking for. So we're going to go ahead and type in the client ID. In this case, it will be owner ID. And the value that we want to pass into this is score. Remember, we set that up here, and we've set that inside the inspector. So in this case, in the inspector, I set that to 5. So if I hit the target, my score will go up by 5. And then what we just want to do is we want to reset this ownership ID. So we're going to go ahead and go collision dot game object dot get component real-time throwable ownership equals -1. Just reset that back to no owner. Alright, so now we're going to go and finish wiring up what we need to inside Unity and just give it a quick test. So we'll jump back into Unity, and if we take a look at the goal check script that we wrote, we do need to populate the scoreboard container field in the inspector. So let's go ahead and drill down, and we're going to drill down to the scores game object, and we're just going to go ahead and drop that down on there. We're just going to do a quick play and see if this updates our score. So there's our scoreboard initialized with player 1 at no points. Go ahead and grab this ball, and there's our scoreboard with 5 points that we added. I'm just gonna, since I'm not in VR, I'm just gonna kind of fly up to it, so I can't really throw. And there we can see that it's kind of touching the scoreboard. Let's go down and see if we got a score. Here we can see both on the scoreboard it says player 1's got 5 points. And if we look at our VR avatar, which is kind of stuck in the floor right now, we can see that we got 5 points as well. So it did work.